couple of things. The feet, like how you kind of assess the feet, the adductors, and asymmetrical hypertrophy, and what you've kind of seen and what your experience has been with that when you've seen, I suppose, using that one first, when you've seen significant hypertrophy on one side compared to the left, how long is it, what's the question? Have you seen, what have you done, I suppose, to correct that? What has been like a common theme that you've seen work?
Okay.
Just doing what we're doing.
Okay, so just clarifying that a little bit more. So we're talking about the circumferential girth as measured by a tape around, for instance, an extremity, lower extremity or something.
Yeah, so like I say, left to right legs, because that was
so
the density of it, the weight of it, that can change the whole way you move just through having a quite big asymmetry.
Yeah, so symmetry as an overall theme, as a general idea about how a physical system is constructed, in terms of thermodynamic efficiency, right? Mechanical, energetic efficiencies as it moves. It's clearly an underlying theme of the muscle system specialist course. One of the normative variables associated with the overall decision making, but it would have to be corroborated against the rest of the data set, right? So, because that's just one sample of the system, and whether or not it could be genetic, or it could be atrophy on the other side, not necessarily hypertrophy. So I wouldn't necessarily even look at it right away as, oh, this is more hypertrophy than the other. I would just say this has less circumferential length, distance than the other side, and how much asymmetry. Like, this is the one thing about the normative value in the center of the Gaussian distribution, right? Perfect asymmetry of all sampled aspects of a particular system that is bilaterally symmetrical left to right, and then how far away from that in either direction can we start to say, ooh, now the amount of asymmetry in any particular characteristic, whether it be girth, density, length, power output, endurance, right, is now detrimental to the system. That's when it gets tricky. I've never seen any data specifically saying that, right? Okay, this is the cutoff where you're going to start to see measurable or detectable decline in the system's output capabilities. And so framing it that way, I would start to look at it against other data points. Like if we're looking at the lower extremity, for instance, and you see, one leg is consistently at the sample points, we do upper thigh under the gluteal fold and 2 inches above the patella on the upper thigh area, and then the calf at the widest, right, and the ankle at the narrowest above the malleolus, right? And you see this trend of, it's less circumferentially than the other side. Okay, so then I start thinking about laterality, dominant side, right? And then I start thinking about injury history to that extremity or to the spine, and looking at occupation or athletic demand. Is there a reason to explain this? Like you're looking at a throwing athlete or a racket athlete where, one arm is upper extremity is got more girth, more circumferential girth than the other side. And that's because of, an inference we can make corroboratively to say it's probably because they're using that side all the time, right? And they're using their muscles, and so the muscles have hypertrophied to meet the demand on that extremity. So it all has to be put into a bigger picture before I start to wonder whether I should do anything about it. Because like in that case, for a racket athlete or a lower extremity dominant athlete, you may want to keep them that way. That might be necessary for the system, for the conditions under which they're using it. It may be beneficial for that particular output. Now, whether or not long term they should stay that way once the conditions under which the system has accommodated and hypertrophied one side over the other in response to intensity and volume stressors. Again, I don't know. I tend to like to see a movement towards the center of symmetry across the system, unless I have a reason to not promote that. Again, because of the underlying axiomatic idea around a bilaterally symmetrical system and its energetic efficiency. And again, anecdotally and observationally, we can see, someone who's lost symmetry, they've lost a leg, they've lost an arm, they've had a stroke, and are there inefficiencies in the system now because of that decrement? Absolutely. If not, why do we fight so hard to get someone with a stroke that side of their body working again? Why do we have someone who's lost an arm or a leg? Why do we give them a prosthetic limb if it's not such a big deal that someone's asymmetrical, right? So folks who argue, don't worry about all that asymmetry stuff, I think you've really missed the point here. But they do have an argument about, well, where's the cutoff where we're going to get so bogged down looking at asymmetries that really don't matter or don't affect the organism in any detectable way. And so that's my long answer to kind of your initial question. But if I have a reason to think there's been atrophy on one side, right, because of an injury, overuse, compensation or something, then yes, I start to get a sense of, okay, what does the loss of circumferential girth in terms of my inference that there may be less cross-sectional area, right? Because that's really the next level of the analysis is, okay, so I think the circumferential girth asymmetry could be due to the loss of muscle cross-sectional area, which we know a priori it does contribute to force output, muscle tension development, which then can lead to torque production limits, right? So we can follow this kind of rational, logical downstream thinking based on that. And so I just start assessing the system and to figure out, is there torque asymmetries? Is there endurance asymmetries? Is there power output asymmetries that I can detect either through, again, quantification by counting reps per unit time under some torque conditions, or some absolute torque production, like a single leg squat, some of the things that we do in the phase 2 assessment, right? And start to figure that out. And then if I do, my exercise prescription tends to follow, I'll keep stimulating the side that I think is, got more cross section than the other side, the other extremity, just to keep it stimulated. But I'll definitely take that other side through volume intensity progressions to see if I can get, more cross section and then an increase in circumferential measurement for sure.
What if you see there's no force output decrement or difference on left? Let's say it's a right leg has hypertrophy and the left leg seemingly hasn't atrophied. If there's no asymmetry in terms of force output, but there's a difference in terms of a cross-sectional area, how much have you seen that as it would affect someone or has effect?
Well, again, it depends on, now we get back to their goal. What do they want their system? Yeah, what do they want their system to be able to do? General exercise, general fitness. I might not worry about it that much then. If I'm like, look, it could be that my circumferential measurement, because it's a pretty rough indicator, it's not about the muscle. It could be subcutaneous fat volume, right? That's different. So, okay. So that's why it's only a lead generating process, right? To point me in a direction to go, well, let me see if there's really a motor output issue here against the backdrop of a more symmetrical system bilaterally across any number of parameters, gives that system a status of health and capability, that is higher than a system that's more asymmetrical. Unless, again, there's a reason that they need the asymmetry for a very particular system output.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Like a punter or a kicker, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my clients has got a bit like an asymmetry on her right leg. Right leg? I'm trying to think now. I can't quite remember. Left leg, and her right leg is the one that's showing the lack of control, and she gets pain. Right hip, supine prone right hip flexion is weak. Her supine right hip flexion is weak.
Low quality.
Yeah, low quality.
Low quality. Yeah.
Her prone knee flexion is low quality. And like central pattern is weak on the right side, right leg, left arm, and she gets left shoulder clunking, she calls it, and right hip pain. So been working on that, seems to be getting better. And right foot as well, there's a definite control issue. She just doesn't have control over it. She does the left, like if you say, okay, squeeze your right foot, as in crunch your toes up, she'll do it with her left as well at the same time.
Yeah, right. The brain's like a kid. Yeah.
Can't differentiate it. In terms of feet, how many ways would you usually, like, what would be your go-to configuration as a system test for that? I've just been doing plantar and dorsiflexion.
Yes.
And like flexion of her foot, as in the toes, like curling the toes over, and then try and pull them out of it.
Yeah, so I would agree that kind of the initial, how well does the foot ankle system dorsiflex and plantar flex? Because if it can't do that, man, you're in trouble. So, and then I start looking at toe function, flexion, extension. Then I start looking at actually tibial internal and external rotation relative to the femur. And then I'll look at foot inversion and eversion as just big picture. Like, okay, how does this look? How can you control these things?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Tibial internal. Yeah. Got ya. Yeah. Because I'm trying to figure out on her. There is in terms of the adductor question, I just had her supine on her back, feet together, and then essentially tried to pull one leg out, and then compared to the other.
Yeah.
And there's a control issue. Right side, I think, is a little bit harder. One or two.
Yeah.
But my thinking is, in terms of the adductors, I'm thinking back again to the a priori knowledge about the insertion in the origin. Like the insertion is like posterior on the femur, and what I've kind of learned before is that it's not the adductor's main function isn't necessarily to adduct the hip. If that makes sense.
So this conversation, I agree with you. This is why configurationalism, dominates the way I think about it. When I studied individual muscle function, normative anatomical muscle function, as if, and again, I think I've given you the worksheets we've done on that. I went through an entire process where I said, if this was the only muscle on the skeleton and the joints were intact and there were ligaments and everything, and it contracted, what would happen?
Yeah.
Right? How would the bones move relative to each other, given that one is fixed, one is a fixed thing and the other thing can move, right? Because that's a different thing, right? If I fix the leg and I contract the psoas, well, then the spine moves. But if I fix the spine and then contract the, now the leg moves. If neither are fixed, now they both move, right? So it's like, okay, hold on a second. You know, even I think the naming of anatomical muscles with kinematic actions like adduction or adductors, or, you know, puts them in a box.
Yeah.
And this is unfortunate because they can perform or contribute to any number of kinematic actions of the body. And so, I mean, there are muscles that can adduct the hip as a general term for the leg moving towards the midline of the body, right? Now, if you're going to say we want it to move through the midline of the body from some relative position of abducted, and only strictly through the frontal plane without any axial motion of the femur, well, I don't know if there's any muscle that does that, right? Right. So it might elevate or extend, it might flex or extend the femur relative to the pelvis while it's actually rotating the femur as well, which is what we saw, right? And you see these things. You're like, there's nothing that's a pure. If you really want only pure adduction, that's an intention of the system, and it's a resultant force created by all the muscles that are in the field and have moments to contribute to that direction of adduction. So that's why I would assess adduction supine, prone, side lying, little flexed, little extended, right? To kind of see, well, where's the region here where there's, you know, the lowest quality part of this.
How would you test adduction side lying?
Well, I think we talked about this a while back, right? There was this, what was it, a knee thing, the Swedes or somebody came up with the side lying hip lift, leg lift.
Yeah, the
hamstring pulling thing.
I can't think what it's called now. I can't think what it's called. So
side lying. You know, the top side leg, you bend and you flex the hip and get it out of the way.
Copenhagen's. Essentially, you lift up to it instead of, because obviously, if you're side lying on your left side and you lift your right leg, to adduct it, it's not a function of the adductors. It's a deceleration from the glutes and
so it's a plyometric of the hip abductor. Yeah, right. Yeah, so in that position, I would actually adduct the leg that's on the table.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'd lift that leg up, but the other leg, the top leg, has to have its foot on the table to provide a base of support, right? So again, that's why it's a unique configuration, but you can still see things. And whether the knee's fully extended or the knee's flexed, right? This matters because it alters the link tension of these muscles that cross the coxofemoral joint and the femoral tibial joint, right? So that just begins another sampling process for me to try to dial in where's the problem here, what configuration really is the lowest quality.
Yeah, in terms of, like, you talked about the naming of anatomical muscles with like directional kinematic
right
names as limiting, like puts you in a box. Is that why you talk about like exercises without names?
Yes.
That kind of just clicked for me. It's like, I've been limiting myself by thinking of the adductors as the name of adductors, adducting for the frontal plane. Right. And I think that was where I was getting my wires crossed. Because your medial, the medial hamstrings, right? Your semitendinosus, semimembranous system, those ones lie closer to the midline. They actually, from a position of hip abducted, can approximate to generate a moment for contributing to the motion of hip adduction, right? Mm-hmm. And I did an entire analysis on the language, lexical and semantics. If you want me to find it, I'll send it to you, about these words that we use to try to describe motion
of body parts, and how the language really starts to break down when you try to talk about what muscles do, and then cardinal plane motions and non-cardinal plane motions, and how some muscles have kinematic descriptions as part of them, some muscles do not, have kinematic, and I don't know why and how the researchers, the cadaver prosectors, were deciding, oh, okay, we found this muscle, let's call it flexor carpi ulnaris. They decided to put the word flexor in there.
Yeah. Pulled on it and saw something. Oh, the hand comes up.
Yeah, so that's probably what they did, right? Which again, I can understand that, but it created a very narrow view of the muscle system, as a control organism, and puts the muscle in this weird actuator box, as if, again, you could only move using that muscle when it's installed in you, in vivo, and you cannot. This is why, which I did for many years, through a system of muscle testing taught based on chiropractic-based clinical kinesiology, where there was this idea, and I don't know if you've seen the work of Reese Manchester on Facebook talking about manual muscle testing and the history of muscle testing. We have a course on it. These are courses we're going to have to start doing in the UK, because we've looked at all of this stuff and realized the provenance of where this idea comes from, that I can test the medial head of your biceps, and I can do this thing and set you up in a configuration that when I pull on you, I've assessed the strength of your biceps medial head, right? It's like, I don't know about all that stuff, right?
This is where with the mentorship I did, where I kind of started moving away, because their idea, they have this thing called the SFT syntax, so sagittal frontal transverse. And if you know the bone rotations, you can kind of figure out through the origin and insertion which muscles are under load. And their idea is that, like, by adjusting the positions of the bones, you can isolate certain muscles and then load a certain muscle. And I came up against, just in my own thinking, my own practice of it, like just personally, after having assessments and doing it over and over again and being religious with the drills that they were giving me and not seeing much of an effect after the first couple of weeks, again, to think it's like, I don't really think that I'm loading the muscles that you think you're loading, in the way that you think you're loading them. That makes sense.
No, probably not. I mean, again, you could say, based on the physics and the a priori understanding of where muscles normatively are, that if motion's in this direction and we have an opposing force, right? So if you're going to oppose this vector, this external perturbation vector, under this set of conditions, then yes, these muscles have moment arms to the axes that we're creating, and the axis is created by the force and the structure of the system. For normal motion, for abnormal motion, you're going to get ACL tears and stuff, right? So you could say, yeah, this set of muscles all can contribute. Whether they do or not, well, that's a different matter.
Yeah,
that's a totally different thing. So
also assuming that the muscles, you're making a big assumption that the muscles that you think you're loading are attached and inserted into the places that you think they are as well.
Yeah, right. And so there clearly is the research that shows there's muscles that are missing in some humans, and we don't share the exact same attachments, generally speaking, right? Again, we talk about the Gaussian distribution of how far away, from where we describe muscles attached, right? We can say, oh yeah, the more distal attachment of the psoas and the iliacus are on the greater trochanter, right? Or the lesser trochanter, I'm sorry, right? We say, oh, yeah, just about every human is down around there. Now, okay, I don't know if they've ever seen that attachment somewhere else on the femur, but yeah, so there's, again, a distribution of where these attachments are that we can lean on. But as far as, making the claim, yeah, when I set you up like this and I do this, I've assessed, the lumbar division of your left psoas, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I've determined it to be weak or tight or something, and now I need to rub it, or do something to it, right, to change it, right? This is the insanity of that, right? So, and again, I went down that rabbit hole for a while and kind of emerged with, wait a minute, what am I doing? I don't think this is really happening. Although it's a great way to learn anatomy, functional anatomy. Go, okay, if this is the only muscle, if all you had was a multifidus or multifidus, right, on the left side of your spine, and it contracted, how would the vertebral bodies move? Yeah, so we could predict that, right? Like, okay, we're going to predict all that stuff, right? But then to say, well, I'm going to set up a test to test the strength of your multifidus, right? And only it starts to get a little crazy, right?
Yeah, I think you're starting to make big assumptions there, isn't it? The more specific you get there. I suppose it gives actual more credence to the qualitative nature of the way you've approached it.
Yes, that's why I kept finding myself there. Like I try to go into this super science, surgically precision based, and I'm like, I can't see any of this. I can't measure any of it directly. What am I doing? Fooling myself into thinking, I'm this super precise, highly physics, mathematically orientated practitioner, and I'm measuring everything. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. It's not happening.
I think I can understand an outsider's perspective that may come through this course and go, yeah, that doesn't work, because use my coach as an example, because it's frustrating as a scientist from a science background not to be able to do that, not to be able to say definitively you are loading this muscle. For a lot, I suppose it's a control issue there. It's their own personal biases.
That's the problem, right? Yeah, this is what happens, right? We don't like uncertainty.
Right.
We don't like it. So we'll impose it where it can't be imposed. We create certainty where it can't be created, right? And so it's like, well, you're fooling yourself, and you're talking to your client and giving them a bunch of mumbo jumbo that they're not going to challenge because they don't know how to challenge you. But really, it's just a bunch of BS. I mean, all you can do is stay at this qualitative kind of gross motor output part of it. But let the science and the a priori stuff inform us. I mean, when I'm working with someone's hip, I have in my mind, yeah, there's a bunch of muscles around here, and I generally know where they're attached and kind of what they would do if they were by themselves, and that might give me some ideas about how to set up other configurations. If I wanted to bias, the adductors that can also flex the hip, right, which are pectineus and adductor brevis, right? Well, then, okay, I'll flex the hip a little while I adduct, but to say I did that and now all I'm testing is your pectineus, well, that's ridiculous. But am I biasing it to the pectineus, adductor brevis, iliacus? Yes. Yeah, that can be useful. Which one's the real problem? Got no idea. And it may not be them. It might be the anchoring system, right? So I have to assess that. So that's why I just defaulted back to, I'm a field scientist. I'm making observations of a system, that I've never seen before, or I've seen similar systems, and I can only observe these things. So I'll work off what I can actually observe. And fortunately, the system I'm working with can talk to me about its experience, right? You feel bad for a lot of animal researchers because they can't ask the giraffe or the bear or the cat, well, how's it going for you? They can't, and so they anthropomorphize everything. They have to what? Say, if I was a cat, this is what I would think. And they impose that on the cat, right? As if that's what the cat's thinking. They have no idea, right? And so
the cat's thinking, what the fuck are you prodding me?
Yeah, what are you doing? That's stop messing with me, right? So, yeah, this is what's crazy about that. But again, I'm just saying, well, since we can, let's use it. Let's get information from it. Okay.
Yeah. Kidding me. What else? The other thing I want to talk about was the use of the systematicity principle and how you go about selecting the appropriate, I suppose, strength to couple with the weakness, if that makes sense. So as an example, today, had this girl over. It's the third time I've seen her. She's a client as well, programming client. She's got the hip pain and that sort of thing. And I got her into, she was supine hip flexion. We were working that and we were doing some plyometrics on it. And I got her to do like just an ab crunch, just hold that as hard as she could while she was letting it go. And is that kind of the right thinking? That was just a thought that if I wanted to get max contraction out of my hip flexion, I would go into a crunch. I would utilize my abs and bring those into play. Like, how do you go about selecting the right strength, I suppose? Like when we did, for me, for instance, you got me everything going left, and then you're okay, right, we're going to use that systematicity principle. We're going to push on my left leg, push it into adduction, but at the same time, you're going to resist that, and you're going to do like a side crunch.
Yeah, so I try to find something that is in proximity to the action, the kinematic action that I'm trying to improve, control output. And then if I can find something that creates a higher level of quality for the perturbation, and then I can start there and add the thing or the part of the action that is low quality to it, I'll do that. So for instance, if I have somebody who's, say, upper extremity, adduction, the arms at the side, they're downwardly rotated a little bit in the scapula and the clavicle, and I pull their arm away from it being adducted and it's low quality. But when I have them elevate, they do have high quality adduction. So I'll say, let's start the contraction where you have high quality adduction, and then you can move down into the configuration where the quality dropped off.
Okay.
So that's one way I apply that idea. So they start from what they can do, and then while they're generating motor output, while they're doing the thing they can do, then I add the thing they can't do. So like in your example of the hip flexion. So if someone's supine and their knees flex 90-ish and they hip flex on the right and you push them out of hip flex and it's low quality. But when they do trunk flexion, they're high quality.
Yeah.
Right? So then I would say trunk flex first. If trunk flexion creates high quality, now let's add the hip flexion to the thing that makes it better.
Okay. And why is it that you came across this, I suppose, way of thinking? Is that just something you observed? You tried and thought, why don't we just do this and see what happens?
No, I was reading about again the concept of systematicity and Hebbian learning.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to think. Okay, so neurons that fire together wire together, right? And this idea that the systems don't like information that is completely independent and in a vacuum that can't be connected to something the system already knows and has access to, right?
Did you say that again?
So this idea of systematicity, right? This idea that connected knowledge, information that has relationships already, is preferred over some vacuous, independent piece of information that can't be connected to anything else. It's all by itself. It becomes almost meaningless, right? Because it's not part of a connected, coherent, meaning created process, right? That's how we create meaning, is we connect things together. Because if I say to you, I give you a piece of information. I say, here's a piece of information, do something with it.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't even know what that is. Right? And so if you don't know what it is and you can't connect it to something you already know and understand and own, it's going to be gone. It's useless to you.
Yeah.
And so if I started to connect it to something you knew, right, which is what your brain did almost automatically, well, that looks like an S.
Yeah, I literally said
dot,
S
right?
dot.
Yeah, you're like, S dot? I'm like, it's not an S, right? It's a symbol that has its own contextual meaning, right? Its own semiotic construct. So, okay. So, but unless I teach that to you, it's meaningless to you. It's an S and a dot.
Yeah. I suppose even if you didn't, I suppose just by calling it an S and a dot is,
you connected it to something you already knew. That's right.
Otherwise, it's just something and something.
Has no meaning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I was thinking about that, like, how does this work? And is there a way for me to use what you already have to give you access to something you're not so good at? And so that's when I started thinking, well, how does this apply to the motor output? I said, well, if I can find something you're not good at and then something close to it that you are good at, maybe I can connect those two things together. And what I see often is that works. The system is so dynamic, right? Because of the way the nervous system's set up in this incredible serial and parallel information processing network. And because neurons start communicating with each other pretty quickly, once they're given the stimulus and the reason to do so, they start connecting.
So is the idea that, just trying to put into my own language, I suppose, putting them into that, let's say, trunk flex position, it's kind of going, okay, this is a good position. Let's use some of that and see if it spreads over to the weak position.
So we're going to connect the action of the lower quality position to the thing you know, like what you just did. Oh, that's an S and a dot, right? And then do that with the various modes. So, and again, those actions are complementary. And so the a priori information that I like to use to help that is the directionality idea, right? That our spatiotemporal organization, my nervous system, has learned, because I'm in a gravity field, right? This is what's amazing about how we calibrated direction in the nervous system. How do we encode leftness and rightness and upness and downness, right? How do we orient ourselves? And we have an axiomatic absolute reference in the gravity vector to the planet's surface, just perpendicularity, right? And so we can orient ourselves to that. Okay, so now the nervous system has direction encoded, leftness and rightness and upness and downness and backness, and right, and it has it knows what a Cartesian coordinate system is built into it. This is an amazing, remarkable thing. And so then I think, all right, well, since that already exists, let's see if we can go ahead and connect that way through direction. Because neurons wire themselves up and communicate in a 4-dimensional way in order to reflect direction. And direction has to do with vectors, right, which are changes in position and space-time. So again, these are like hard physics facts that we can lean on, like a bubble level, right? You don't need numbers, you don't need units. Why? Because it's referencing and calibrating to an absolute value every time. That's literally unchanging.
Yeah.
So we can lean on that. Say, okay, well, this is going to show me, what perpendicularity is in space every time I use it.
Yeah. Crazy.
Right? That is crazy, right? So let's go ahead and leverage that idea. And so that's always, in the back of my, when I'm observing the system, how does it perceive direction?
Yeah.
So I can use systematicity with that.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily about, because the way I was thinking about it is, okay, we have to get this, like that whole everything going left and trying to get my lat working. We have to get that working because that's how it's meant to work together. It's not. It's more of an idea of transference of knowledge onto a weaker component.
Yes, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, information transfer or soldering that information. Right. Remember all the research that we talked about in the sales part about how neurons hook up and wire up in those critical windows, right? And which ones get soldered, which ones get really anchored, which synaptic connections really get solidified through the hypertrophy, the quantum neurotransmitter, right? The rate at which those neurotransmitters and pre and postsynaptically can move, right? All this, gets reinforced by repetition, regular use, right? And that's connected to this, and then this is connected to that, and so that's what a little baby's trying to figure out, right? Is how do I get myself moving in this gravity field that I can feel, and start to wire myself and encode myself with this space I'm in. Pretty wild stuff, right?
Yeah. So it's what I'm actually seeing a lot of now. Actually, one of the other questions. I follow this guy called, I think I tagged you in a post that he put up called Stop Chasing Pain. It's on Instagram. I can't think of his name. And he's very big on the lymph system. Have you ventured into that area and looked into that?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I'm familiar with the lymph system, and clearly it's part of the concrescent nature of the process. So I just, I don't know. How would you assess lymph system function?
Yeah.
I know that lymph system, and it has a relationship to the circulatory system, which has a relationship to the muscular system, right? Which has a relationship to the nerve. So I understand that there's this relationship, but that regular muscle contraction and relaxation cycles and the internal pressure dynamic changes in the materials can influence lymph flow.
Yeah. One of the things he actually, I was going to, is that why you kind of defaulted back to the muscular system?
Yes, everywhere I looked, right? Everywhere I looked, I just kept going, wait a minute. This is crazy.
Yeah.
It looks like everything can affect everything else. Got it, right? Yeah. But the most profound influences apparently come from the motor part, and that most everything that's in us is serving that.
Yeah.
Because if we don't move, we die. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like that absolute standard. This has to happen. So if the ability to move about one's environment is fundamental to the organism's survival, everything must serve that mandate.
Yeah. It's quite literally the core reason for our structure and system is to to move about and negotiate the environment.
Apparently that's what everything is doing. So I'm just like, all right, I'll just focus on that. How well are you at controlling your system in an environment under conditions?
Yeah, because I mentioned this to my coach when we were talking about pain and things, and I said it's seemingly everything is set up to serve muscle function, and he was like, "How so? Like, how is that so?" I kind of said that idea, and I'm not sure if he understood it or not. Hopefully, he took it on board. But
well, did you say, "Well, you're speaking now"? How is that possible? Why are you talking?
Yeah.
Right? What do you mean? Most of us don't think talking is a motor act. No. Coughing is a motor act. Sneezing is a motor act. Bowel movements are motor acts. Blinking is a motor act.
Yeah.
So eating is a motor act.
Your heart beating.
It's a motor act, and so it's all this motor action, right? So it's like, oh, okay.
Breathing, motor act, diaphragm.
Yes, right. Can you hold position in space? Can you change position in space? How good are you at that?
Yeah.
Oh, we got some issues. Okay, well, let's see if we can make you better at it. Yes, apparently, the better you are at negotiating space and time, the more high functioning you are. The healthier you are as an organism, your chances of survival go up dramatically.
Yeah. I suppose that's the fittest survive, only the fittest survive type thing, isn't it? Or the ones that can move about their environment and negotiate it best, both linguistically and relationally.
Well, relationships are based on what? Our ability to interact with someone else, which is based on all this motor act. I mean, if you can't have a relationship with a dead person that's sitting in front of you, there's no relationship there, right? So it's so wild, right? That's even what transactional analysts are trying to say, right? And even folks on the periphery of that. Our nervous systems, our very being is shaped by how we interact and transact with other creatures and living, moving entities.
Yeah, I tagged you in an Instagram post. Don't know if you saw it. I quoted you. Let me find it quickly. Where is it? Highlights. Take a while. Where is it? Yeah, how you are as a human, being in this world is about movement and your sensory experience, which is constructed by your relationship with other humans and the environment around you.
Yeah, right. So
you should definitely start one of the things that I have seen, I've spoke about with a friend who owns a marketing agency. He's seen a bigger rise out of personal Instagram profiles than he has for business Instagram profiles. So all of his employees and things like that, they've all got like a couple 100,000 followers, and they funnel people to his business.
That's interesting.
5,000. So I think it might be worth to start a personal, because people like people, don't they? And it's that same idea of people are going to be more influenced by you as a person than they are as a business, as a separate entity, which isn't a person. It's hard to build a relationship with a person, with a business, but they can build a relationship with you, and you can then funnel it to the business, especially in this early phase.
Great, another Instagram account.
And that's what I did. So I post mainly through my personal profile now. Once I get more photos and things, I'm going to start posting on my business page, but it's going to be very what's the word I'm looking for? Not impersonal, but there's a bit of a barrier there. I want people to build the relationship with me because it is about the coach, and then I will go, okay, funnel them onto base training, and yeah, that's kind of my thinking about that.
Okay, interesting. Oh, yeah, I'll have to look at that now.
Might be something to think about.
I agree. I agree, and I'll be interested to see, because I've been putting our little chats on the Exercise Explorers Club
Cool.
on the website, and I'm going to start hopefully seeing who's watching. I got my first registration a couple weeks ago, so I want to start filling that up with information like this, so people can just kind of explore and go, what are they talking about? Systematicity and asymmetry, and what is this? What is this? So,
it's all questions that people are going to be having,
for sure,
because it is so in depth. But you are going to get people buy it that maybe don't have the I suppose adequate level of a prior knowledge, and they're thinking adductors. They've got all of this language thrown about. They're like, what is he talking about? Yeah. One, I suppose, last question. Have you got to go? Yeah. You got?
Yeah, in a few minutes. Go ahead.
The book in the weekend one that you reference is a neurobiology book. You reference it quite a few times.
Yeah.
What's that called?
I think it's the neurobiology of EMDR.
Yeah, it's when you say like they're kind of starting to figure it out. Neurobiology of EMDR.
Yeah, eye movement, right? Eye movement. I'm not sure if I have it here. I think it's at my office. Yeah, I was reading that. One of my clients is a psychologist, and we're always yapping about some of this stuff, and he recommended that book, and I started reading it, and I was like, holy crap, right? So that's the interesting thing. It's kind of the idea we talked about a session or two ago about non-peer review. Like, you got to start reading other people's stuff, and here's psychologists talking about, well, how do we deal with, post-traumatic stress, and they're looking at the visual system, right, which is the part of the motor system, right? They're using the visual motor system to literally change the emotional state of someone, which is, again, it's an informational change, and they're having success with it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow, man, okay, I'm working with the eye motor system, but not for emotional reasons. Just for motor output control reasons. But I wanted to see what he said, hey, you got to check this out. I wanted to see what they said about it. And I started reading it. I'm like, gosh, they're saying they're along the same lines as neurobiologists and motor theorists. Everyone's converging on these ideas.
Do you think there is a group of people, and you being one of them, that are kind of starting to figure this out? And how do we connect those people together?
Well, yeah, that was the idea of the muscle system consortia that I just never got off the ground. Maybe we'll revisit that. But I agree. Yeah, how do we get, again, explorers, to start getting together, right? It's one of the reasons I'm interested in this MedFit network a little bit is, well, there's doctors and therapists and a lot of people, all dancing around this idea of how do we use exercise and fitness to help with medical conditions, right? Yeah. And change the medical system. And so, if I can contribute to that, or we can contribute to that on the motor side and say, look, we're seeing these things. I see these things in the motor system. And not only is motor output diagnostic in that regard, but then we might be able to use the motor system to change other parts of the system. And again, I'm not the only one that's thinking about this. Kinesiologists and figuring out how do we access more of the motor system is really, and connect these ideas together, in predictable ways, or at least in ways that we can explore and see maybe the unique presentation of motor capability that someone presents. Right? We may not see consistently fixed patterns that generalize across everybody, but we may have exploratory process to say, for you as an N1, there is a relationship between your right leg and your left shoulder or upper extremity, but maybe not for someone else. But because of your unique history, your unique injuries, the unique way you've used your system, the unique way it's configured itself internally based on all the stimulus you've given it to it, accumulate over years, you have this particular profile
Mm.
of motor output dysfunction. And by improving that, what do you know? Your lymph system works better. You're not so stressed emotionally anymore. You don't have pain in your hip anymore, right? All these other things, right?
Yeah, it's how close do you think you are to coming up with what I suppose might be the 2 seconds. Hello. What might be the an answer to these questions, like a general consensus?
I don't know. Yeah, no. I just, I need people like you to help. I don't know.
I suppose you need to get you speaking.
Yep. And data, more experiences, right? More people using it and thinking about it. So yeah, I think that's just what has to happen. Explore, right? We need explorers for sure. So
yeah, I'd like to. I can't think of his name is now. The biomechanics is one of your prodigies. It might be the one that's actually Brandon Green, the one teaching the course. He does his assessments on an iPad, doesn't he?
I think he does, yeah. And one of the guys I just hired, he wants to see if he can start taking pictures. And there was a guy at the Seattle course, I think Xavier, who's got like the forms and everything on an iPad. And yeah, it'd be nice if we could get that data standardized in a way that we could put it into a Excel sheet and start collecting it.
Yeah, because I suppose that's going to be what everyone wants to see, isn't it? The scientists, the ones that can actually give you the exposure and I suppose the tick in the box to say, yeah, this guy's legit, because everyone listens to a scientist most of the time for some reason.
Yes, they do.
If you've got a doctorate, you're more.
You're legit.
Yeah, you're legit.
You're a high priest in the religion of science, right? So
it's a great way of putting it. But at the end of the day, you do need data to prove the theory, don't we? So yeah, interesting. Okay, mate, right. Well, I'll let you go.
All right.
Appreciate that, mate. It was really interesting. Could you actually send me that video?
Yep, I'll do it.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right, see you.
Have a good day, buddy.